Take credit. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Overtime College Football Podcast. My name is Andrew Van. I am joined by my co-host, William Trotter. So we're going to go ahead and get started today. Anything you want to say there, William?
Not really. I'm an average college football fan. I love to watch a bunch of different games every week, a variety of games, even some Division II, Division III games. But my passion is Division I college football. So I'm excited to see where this podcast goes, getting off the ground and see what we can do with it, what it will become. So, yeah, I'm excited, man.
I mean, let's go ahead and get one thing out of the way. We're college football fans. And whenever you're a college football fan, you have your own team. As you all can see, I'm clearly a Notre Dame fan. I don't go to Notre Dame. I go to a different Big 12 university. So there's some bias there. I'll admit it. If you think that I'm being a little too biased or a little bit too much of a homer, call me out. And I will gladly debate you. And let's bring forward some evidence, some data, just not anecdotal evidence. I don't care if you feel good about your football team. We all feel good about our football team. But we need to have data support what we're going to say. And that's what we're going to try to bring to this. Why we feel good about each football team on top of some anecdotal evidence. Because let's be truthful, we're only human.
Yeah, and similarly, I went to a Division I AA school, but I'm an avid Clemson Tigers fan, hardcore since the day I was born. So once again, I'm going to be slightly biased to Clemson at times. Let me know if it's too much. We'll make a change. We'll correct it. Or if I'm completely right, I'll ignore your comment and keep going. But I'm excited to get into it. Let's do it.
I mean, I think it's great that we have a Notre Dame fan, which is the tradition of college football. You can't tell the history of college football without talking Notre Dame. But yet you can't talk current day football without mentioning how dominant Clemson has been. So it's a great mingle and merger of two fans talking football. Especially since, let's be truthful, Notre Dame's back in the spotlight. Clemson's been in the spotlight. These are two powerhouse teams, and you have fans to talk about it.
And I think it's also interesting we have somewhat of a familiarity Notre Dame Clemson fan, especially last year when Notre Dame joined the ACC for a year during the COVID year. It made for two really good games, two very high viewership games, and we have some familiarity now, especially a couple years ago in the 14 college football playoff as well. So I'm excited to get our viewpoints and our disagreements and agreements. So yeah.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and get things started off. Our first topic is going to be our personal reactions to the top 10. We're going to try to bring in some data. We're going to try to bring in some anecdotal evidence. We're going to talk about what these teams are missing from last season and where we think that they might be overrated just solely based on what they did last season. So who's not overrated, let's just go ahead and get it off, is the reigning national championship and the number one team, Alabama Crimson Tide. They have been the dominant force over the past decade, and they rightfully deserve to be number one. Even though they lost a lot from quite possibly the best college football offense of all time.
Yeah, like we talked about off air, I have no problem with the reigning national champion being ranked number one starting the season. They're number one until somebody knocks them off and or another team proves that they deserve to be in that spot. But overall, I have no qualms with Alabama being number one, especially when, even though they have a new quarterback, Bryce Young, they're going to have a new running back, Najee Harris, to the NFL, lost some other NFL talent.
Well, they lost the reigning Heisman Trophy winner in Devontae Smith. So it's not an easy thing to replace that type of production. But whenever you recruit at the level of Alabama, number one class or top three class for how many years straight, over a decade, it's reload, not rebuild. So Alabama is there until someone proves them not to be the number one team.
Yeah, we expect them to have a strong season. Coming in hot at number two, which is a change up and hurts my heart a little bit, but I get it, is Oklahoma. Oklahoma, number two, had 6 first-place votes to be in the number one spot. They return a strong team. They return Spencer Rattler yet again, and we know that Lincoln Riley has a history of not only training his quarterbacks to be very good on the field, but also has a track record of getting his quarterbacks to Heisman. So we'll see how their campaign goes this year in a Big 12 that could be down a little bit.
I mean, so all you have to do is look at how Oklahoma finished the season last year. Look at Spencer Rattler and how he finished the season last year. There was much clamor for Notre Dame to have been not even in the playoffs, and they wish Oklahoma had been in there because they were the better team at the moment. And I can't really deny that was a great team, but they didn't earn the spot. That's my stance. Hate on me all you want. They were a 2-loss team. Notre Dame was a one loss to the number 2 team. So take it with a grain of salt. But Oklahoma is definitely a good team and a team I think that should win the Big 12 and have a spot in the college football playoff if things play out in their favor this season.
I think my biggest question surrounding this is not just a number two placement of Oklahoma, but also going into the season, we know that Oklahoma has the offense to put up big numbers. And we've consistently seen that year in and year out. I am somewhat concerned about what their defense looks like this year and if they'll be able to compete with the Clemsons, the Ohio States, the Alabamas on the defensive side of the ball. So that's something that I'm going to be keying into, especially
how I see
as
Oklahoma. Oklahoma is just the polar opposite of Notre Dame. Notre Dame has the defense to win a national championship, but they cannot find the offense to win it. Oklahoma has the offense to win a national championship today, but they just don't have the defense. They didn't have it last year. They've been recruiting better on that side of the ball, though. So, and they have shown improvement every year with Lincoln Riley. So ever since they got stomped by Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. So there's been improvement on that side of the ball. They're no longer allowing LSU types to score 70 on them. So it'll be interesting to see if the defense has improved enough to prove them to be the number 2 team.
Totally agree. Number 3 we have coming in, yours truly, the Clemson Tigers. Also tied with Oklahoma for 6 first-place votes. We know Clemson lost a plethora of talent last year, including arguably the best quarterback in college football, or at least in my mind, Trevor Lawrence. He also lost his mainstay, Travis Etienne, who was a workhorse at Clemson all 4 years, including those 2 talented individuals. Also lost Amari Rogers and Cornell Powell, 2 big keys to the wide receiver core last year, and their success returns pretty much the whole defense besides Darian Kendrick, who got released from the team right before team camp. But it will be interesting with so many fresh faces to see how the offense gels. The defense should be strong. It's going to be another Brent Venables coach defense. They should have no problems from what I'm seeing out of camp right now. But it will be interesting to see how DJ does with the full reins. We know that he showed out in the Notre Dame game, lost, but had a good showing, good first showing, good strong showing against Boston College as well. But there are several unknowns going into the season, and they face a really big test first week against Georgia, who has probably top 5 defense in college football.
Top 5 talented defense. That team just doesn't play up to the level of the talent that they have. You can blame coaching. You can blame a lot of things. I'm not sold on Georgia yet because Georgia really isn't a well-coached team in my opinion. They are a very talented team, but they manage to find a way to lose big games all the time.
Yeah, I agree. I think Kirby is a skilled football coach, Kirby Smart, but it seems like he can't get the cohesion that's necessary with the level of talent they have to get the full performance on the field, especially in big games. It seems like something always happens, a bunch of flags, some sort of craziness happens where they can't put it all together. But nonetheless, I'm looking forward to that first week matchup in Charlotte and Bank of America Stadium. I think it will be a great opening to the college football season.
It's going to be interesting because going back to Clemson, they're replacing arguably one of the best college football quarterbacks of all time with a superior talent. Like DJ Uiagalelei is quite possibly one of the most talented quarterbacks that we've seen in a while. He's not the runner that Trevor Lawrence is, but I think the arm might be better, which is somehow absurd to say that someone has a better arm than Trevor Lawrence. But if you look, he's got some strength under that arm. He's just not quite the runner that T-Law was. But I feel like it would be interesting. Without ETN, and Clemson never really runs that strong of an offensive line, they just have a cohesive group that's able to work together. So with that offensive line, the lack of skill, because I think Will Shipley will be a great player, it's going to take him a little bit of time. He's a true freshman. You're not going to step in and immediately replace Travis Etienne in production and be the same player. I hate to tell you, sometimes you just have to wait for it to chip in, and Will Shipley's no Travis Etienne yet.
No, I think one player aside from DJ that I'm really looking forward to seeing and spotlighting on Clemson's offense is Justin Ross. The return of Justin Ross. Sat out all last season after a surgery to fix some spinal confusion, I think, or congenital fusion or whatever. He had some very bad back issues. The same ones that ended the elder Manning's career way early on. I think it will be interesting to see how he performs. He did very well in the previous years he was able to play. So to see his return is something that makes me really look forward to watching this Clemson team.
Yeah, I mean, Justin Ross was just ranked by PFF as the number 5 player draft eligible in the ACC. So Justin Ross is a talent that we have not seen in a few years, and he might take college football by storm just because he's an unknown for not playing last season.
Couple him with a great, though young, wide receiver core with E.J. Williams, Frank Ladson, if he's healthy, which he has not been. Joseph Ngata, same thing. And some other freshman talent such as Dakari Collins, Bo Collins, Troy Stellato. There's a stable of guys. It's just they're young, and it's going to be interesting to see how they perform, especially in these first games, and especially in the big game against Georgia, because I'm sure at some point their number will get called. It's just when and how they perform in the moment. So we will see. Rolling on in the AP Top 25, Top 10 is Ohio State at number 4. We know last year Ohio State beat Clemson in the first round of the college football playoff. They lost Justin Fields. They lost Trey Sermon. They lost a wide receiver or two, and we will see how they do. They don't. I haven't heard much out of their camp about their new quarterback yet or anything, but I think they're in a similar class with Clemson and Alabama where they don't really rebuild. They just reload.
I mean, you look at the recruiting classes. I don't have much problem with Ohio State being number 4. They've proved they deserve to be there. They were the national runners-up, even though they got blown out of the national championship. You could even make the argument they need to be over Clemson, even though they lost equal amount of talent. But the difference is that Brent Venables' defense is a proven commodity. Ryan Day's still a new coach. What is this, his second season? Or third now?
Third season for Ryan Day.
Okay, thank you for the correction. But it shows you he's a good coach. I'm not going to argue that at all. But is he one of the best coaches like Brent Venables? Brent Venables, if you wanted to hire him today and he said yes, it would be a done deal. You don't say no to the top defensive coordinator in college football.
No. And I think it will be interesting to see the Big Ten has some bruiser teams in there, but as we've seen, Ohio State has kind of been the top dog the past few years, and I don't really expect that to change. So at the end of the season, I expect them to be in that conversation unless they somehow manage to get upset a couple times. They're one of those teams that always seems to find their way in. Even last year, only played in 6 games, and we all doubted them, myself included, and they showed they deserved to be there. So very interested to watch them as the season progresses. Similarly, Georgia at number 5. We just talked about Georgia always has that problem that they can't seem to make it through the season without having some head-scratching losses or something crazy go on or disappoint in a big game. They have JT Daniels, who kind of took over at the middle point of the season last year and did pretty well, pretty strong. Georgia has talent on the offensive side of the ball, given that George Pickens is out probably till mid-September, early October, and then Arik Gilbert has left the team. They still have a lot of talent there and can make some really good moves as long as, everything plays out for them. So that number 5 spot for Georgia is also interesting to watch, especially with the SEC schedule ahead.
Here's the thing. I think if Georgia goes out, loses week 1 in a close game to Clemson, they've proved well enough that they are a top 5 team. And I don't mind keeping them in the top 10 as a 1-loss team to a Clemson. At least they took the battle straight on and faced a Clemson. But Georgia just has not been Georgia typically in these big games. It's at Charlotte. It's in Charlotte, right? So more of a Clemson home field advantage.
Oh yeah, Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte. Clemson's very familiar with it, almost a home field in a way for them.
I mean, they play the ACC championship there every year, and it's been pretty nice to them there.
Yeah, not too many complaints coming out of there for Clemson fans. I think it will be interesting. As I've said, we've seen Georgia kind of falter, and at times Georgia seems a little bit soft, especially in the fourth quarter against opponents that's equally matched or maybe even a little overmatched for them. They seem to falter, especially at the end of that third and fourth quarter. So we'll see if it's a close game. I think that it will go one of two ways. Either they'll give up and Clemson will pull away, or they'll stick right down to the wire. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see. This is all.
Somehow Georgia manages to find a way to lose to a South Carolina type again.
Yeah, that loss really hurt them the other year. That embarrassment against South Carolina.
But let's not act like it's only small teams that upset them, because you had Florida just straight blow them out last year. But that Florida team was fairly good. And talking about a team that beat that Florida team, we're going to go on to A&M. A&M is where the debate can kind of start for where we see the top 10 shifting, is the latter half. So A&M, a lot of people are high on. I think that their defense that is returning will be probably a top 10 unit. I am a huge fan of Mike Elko. Mike Elko, whenever he was at Notre Dame, helped turn around Notre Dame's 2016 abysmal defense into the team that has made it to the college football playoffs 2 of the past 3 years. So even though he left Notre Dame, he showed that he is a top-notch defensive coordinator. And I believe in Mike Elko. Jimbo Fisher's a question, because he's able to do a lot of good, but does he have enough to win the SEC, which is, as proven, the most difficult conference to make it through unless you're Alabama. And to get through, you have to beat Alabama. So can A&M finally take that leap and beat Alabama? And they're missing Kellen Mond, their quarterback from last season. And their offensive line, I think it'll be good. Will it be world-breaking? I think it's kind of the same as Clemson. It's going to be a good offensive line, but it can be taken advantage of.
Yeah, speaking on Texas A&M, I don't have too much to add. I think getting to this point in Jimbo's career at Texas A&M is kind of do or die time. Either we're going to see them really progress, or we're going to see them kind of be a middle of the pack team. I can't super disagree with the number 6 ranking. I think it could be a little bit high, but we'll just have to see what they do, and if they prove that they belong in the top 10, or we'll see them fall from it with a lot of disgrace very shortly if they don't live up to expectations.
Well, let's just go ahead. I can't remember the coach that said this, but his phrase was, it's a lot easier to go from a 3-9 team to a 9-win team than it is to go from a 9-win team to an undefeated team. So they've definitely made it up to the tier 2 of college football. Can they make it to that tier 1, which is where we have Georgia, Notre Dame types sitting? They clearly can't win the national championship. I would even put Oklahoma in that tier 2 category. They can't win the national championship, but they can make it to the playoffs. You have 3 teams that have proven that they can consistently win a national championship. Besides that, it's tier 2 teams who have proven that they can make it there and respectively get blown out.
Yeah, so moving on, in the number 7 spot, we have Iowa State. And this is where I start to somewhat disagree with the rankings. As a whole, I think there are a few teams that are ranked 1 or 2 spots lower than them that possibly deserve that number 7 ranking. As we saw last year, even though Iowa State finished the season with a 9-3 record, they were upset by the Raging Cajuns, I believe, at home. And a 9-3 team, I get it. They play in the Big 12, right?
Yes, they play in the Big 12. And I think one of the biggest love affairs with Iowa State is Brock Purdy, because they're returning Brock Purdy, which is a good quarterback. But Brock Purdy against elite teams has not been an elite quarterback. He got blown out by Notre Dame in the Camping World Bowl 2 years ago, and Oklahoma did dirty things to them last year in the Big 12 championship. So take this Iowa State team with a grain of salt. I know that we like to be bold and adventurous, and someone knows something that someone else doesn't, but is Iowa State really better than North Carolina, Oregon, Notre Dame, Wisconsin? Ask yourself that question.
Historically speaking, I would tend to say
I don't care about historically. I care about this team. I care about this year's Iowa State team. And really and truly, you're a team that got upset by the Raging Cajuns last year. You're returning most of the talent that got upset by the Raging Cajuns last year. And you want to tell me that you're better than a lot of more talented teams, quite frankly. I am a huge fan of their head coach, but I think that it's just too high for Iowa State based on the production from last season and Brock Purdy's success against elite teams.
I agree. I think, to be honest, in the number 8 spot, Cincinnati possibly deserves that, even though I don't know how good Cincinnati's going to be this year. I find that ranking to be a little bit inflated as well. They play in the American Athletic Conference, given they had a successful year last year. However, I don't know if they have the offense for one to make it through the season and stay in the top 10. And as we know, their defensive coordinator left Cincinnati last year as well. So I find that to be a weakness. Too.
What was the biggest success in that bowl game against Georgia? It was the defense. The defense was phenomenal to hold Georgia in check. But let's not forget, 2 years ago, whenever Texas beat Georgia, and I think it was a Sugar Bowl, and Texas was back, Georgia's proven if they're not in the college football playoffs, they don't really care about a bowl game all too much. So to say you had success against an elite SEC team, and that one was Georgia, it kind of reminds me of UCF claiming themselves as national champions after they beat a Auburn team who was mad they weren't in the playoffs.
Yeah, we've seen a certain level of apathy from Georgia and other high caliber teams that don't make it into the playoff. They just really don't want to be there. And from what I saw in that bowl game last year, Cincinnati's offense was not impressive. Their quarterback was somewhat abysmal, I would say, in that game, given I didn't watch a lot of their regular season games. Maybe he was a superstar, but in that particular game, he didn't do anything special. And it's my understanding as well that he won't be the starter this year, correct? He moved on.
I would be speaking out of my ass if I said yes or no to that question, so I will refrain from answering.
Okay. Either way, I think the number 8 spot is a little bit high, but I've been surprised before and wouldn't be all too mad to be surprised again. So
we're basing Cincinnati off of where they were last year. They lost some pieces. I think it's a little bit too hasty of a judgment to say that they're better than some of these teams. Number 9, we have Notre Dame. Notre Dame is losing a lot of offensive production from last season. So they lost 4 of 5 starters on the offensive line, 2 of their 3 starting wide receivers, and their quarterback on offense. So it's very easy to say that Notre Dame will be a down team in a rebuild season. But I think Notre Dame is one of those teams where they have the talent to reload, not rebuild. They're bringing in Jack Cohen from Wisconsin. Cohen was not a bad quarterback in Wisconsin. Guess what? He actually led Wisconsin to the Rose Bowl. So that's not a bad quarterback at any stretch of the imagination, and he has a better downfield arm than Ian Book. And I think that fits this offensive system better, where you have speed receivers taking over the perimeter, on top of probably the nation's best tight end. And on the defensive side, they have the best safety in college football. They're replacing one corner and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. So they have some talent to replace, but that defense, I feel, will be a top 10 unit, especially bringing in Marcus Freeman from Cincinnati. So how much of a difference does this Marcus Freeman scheme make? Does this push Notre Dame over the top? Is the offense good enough? Because Notre Dame has consistently proven they are not good enough to beat the Alabamas and the Clemsons at full strengths of the world. So until Notre Dame goes out and does it, go ahead and call Notre Dame an overrated team.
Yeah, I like this number 9 ranking for Notre Dame. I think some of the faults that I found with Ian Book last year was that he scrambled a little bit too much, was a little too hesitant with the ball, and couldn't necessarily make the downfield long throws.
Welcome to every Notre Dame fan's life. We all knew you had your Ian Book lovers, and you had your guys who knew what Ian Book was a quarterback you could win games with, but he's not going to win you a game.
And I kind of felt bad for Ian Book in a way. We saw in the first Clemson matchup. I mean, he was on fire and then stayed on fire for quite a few games. And then in the ACC championship game, we kind of saw him return to his old form. But that being aside, I think the transfer from Wisconsin will be integral in the success of the offense. Being able to make those long throws, stretch out the opposing defense, and score, and then having a very strong defense to back up the offense is honestly just a recipe for success.
One last thing I want to touch on with Notre Dame is they have the best backfield in all of college football right now. Chris Tyree and Kyron Williams. I know you're a little familiar with Kyron Williams off the second play of the Clemson game. You know how deadly he can be, and he's not even the fastest running back on the team.
Yeah, I think the key strength besides the backfield will lie with Notre Dame's offensive line, which Notre Dame's not known for having a weak offensive line, so I don't see
that's where I'll argue with you. I think this will be the weakest Notre Dame offensive line you have seen in over a decade.
No,
I am not a Jeff Quinn fan by any stretch of the imagination. We were an offensive line university because of Harry Heinstein, and he was what developed Zach Martin. He's who developed Quentin Nelson, Mike McGlinchey, Ronnie Stanley, besides Mike McGlinchey, 3 all-pro talents coming from one offensive line coach, and Jeff Quinn, the new offensive line coach, is just riding the coattails of Harry Heimstein's success. So I'm not sold by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not a big Kane Manning fan either, who transferred from Marshall to Notre Dame. It's one thing to dominate at that level of college football. It's another thing to dominate at Notre Dame's level of college football.
And just so I'm correct here, right? Notre Dame is back to playing an independent schedule this year. They're going to have a couple ACC games, I believe, but they're back to playing the good old schedule pre-COVID.
Yeah, Notre Dame will play their typical schedule. There are 5 ACC games and then the rest independent. So.
Okay, yeah. Hopefully we'll get to see some good games from them and see some success.
You have to remember, Notre Dame has 4 top 15 opponents from this preseason top listing. You have USC, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Cincinnati. Notre Dame plays on this schedule. So I don't want to hear this hoopla about Notre Dame not playing anybody. Unless midway through the season, Notre Dame's undefeated and everyone's going to be, Notre Dame doesn't play anybody. They were overrated teams.
Yeah, I will pay close attention to both the Cincinnati game and the North Carolina game, being that the number 10 in the AP preseason poll is North Carolina. As we know, they're led by Sam Howell, the quarterback who almost toppled Clemson his freshman year, gave us a super big scare up there. He's been doing nothing but improving. They did lose a little bit of talent on the offensive side of the ball. The running back and I believe wide receiver, Chaz
They lost both the running backs. They lost 2,000 yards production from their backfield.
And we didn't even get to see these players go to action in the Orange Bowl. They opted out in the Orange Bowl. Point aside, there is a drop-off in offensive production, but I have zero doubts that Mac Brown will not find some way to scheme this offense to be successful.
I mean,
especially with
offense,
an ACC schedule.
I think this defense, from what we saw last season, was an improvement week by week. Let another year be under this system with the defensive coordinator, we might be talking about an not elite, but a top tier defense for North Carolina. Because let's be truthful, that's how you win a national championship. Your offense can be great, but you got to have a defense to back it up. And that could be what puts North Carolina over the top. It's a second year in this defensive system in order to gain some confidence and become an elite defense that can match that offense if they're able to return production.
If you have to ask me today as a Clemson fan who I'm most scared of in the ACC or who we will face in the ACC championship, it's North Carolina all day. I believe North Carolina is going to be the second strongest team in the ACC and has the potential to possibly overtop Clemson.
Well, I have a question for you.
Clemson is not on their A game.
Miami, they're 14. I think Miami is an up-and-coming team. Diaz is doing a pretty good job. I mean, they were coming back up under Mark Richt, but Diaz seems to be the guy for the job. Do you think that Miami will pose any threat to Clemson?
Miami, like you said, is an up-and-coming team. I do not think they are at the level to compete with Clemson yet. As we saw in the game last year, it was overhyped a good bit, and Clemson went in there and took care of business. I think Miami can have a successful run in the ACC. I just don't necessarily see them as the biggest threat. I see North Carolina as possibly being the biggest contender in the ACC right now. Not to say that Miami won't be there in a couple years, but I don't find King to be the end all be all for Miami. Hopefully they will get somebody better in, but I don't think he's going to take them to that level.
So I'm going to go with right outside the top 10 for a second. I'm going to talk about Oregon. How do you not put Oregon in your top 10? The reigning Pac-12 champion, you're just going to leave out of your top 10.
Yeah, that doesn't make much sense to me. Oregon, they did have a couple bad years, but they've been back up on the rise, like you said, reigning Pac-12 champion. And it's somewhat disrespectful to leave them out of the top 10. I think they're going to be poised for probably another successful year and probably another run at the championship. Don't know if they'll make it to the college football playoff, but there's no reason to discriminate against them this early in the season, especially in the first rankings.
Okay, I'm going to catch you off guard. This one was not on topic at all. Give me your Power 5 conferences winners. ACC, SEC, AAC, Pac-12, and Big 12.
Whew. All right, so the SEC, that's pretty easy. That's going to be Alabama. More than likely, that's my pick. ACC, Clemson. It will be a very good game against North Carolina. I see us coming out on top. AAC, I guess I'll just go with the easy answer, Cincinnati. I mean, whatever. Big Ten, Ohio State. I see them probably being the forerunner to win it. Pac-12, now that's a tough one. Possibly, maybe USC. They seem to be making somewhat of a comeback. And who am I missing?
Big 12.
Big 12. We'll go with Oklahoma, baby. Why not? There's no reason to bet
You
against
don't
them.
think Sark's going to make a
They've,
splash in his first season back as a head coach?
Look, Sark may not make it through the season. We know that Texas, not only to be a football coach there, is it a tough job because there's a lot of pressure on you from fans, but there's also a ton of pressure from boosters as well. And those boosters are very influential. You could probably not pay me enough money to go be the football coach at Texas.
Let's not act like Sark did not have his demons as a head coach at USC. I mean, I thought he was a damn good coach at USC. It was taking some time, but I remember as a Notre Dame fan, I was actually glad whenever they fired Sarkisian.
Yeah, as we saw Sarkisian being a coordinator at Alabama, he's a very, very intelligent football mind and is very successful. It's just, can he continue to keep his demons at bay? And I don't wish evil on no man. I'm just going, historically speaking, it will be interesting to see what his first season looks like. I believe there's a lot of pressure on his shoulders to come in and for Texas to win from the start. Not saying they won't. They do have some talent out there, but I don't expect them to be the front runner.
I'll be truthful. I think that Texas made a good move by hiring someone that has head coaching experience at a school equally as tough as Texas, because it's not easy to be the head coach at USC. And let's not act like he didn't go to the Nick Saban Rehabilitation Coaching Clinic. He became one of the very many to have a semi-successful multiple national championship run under Nick Saban.
Yeah, we'll see how he's reformed, what he's learned from, how he will use that at the University of Texas to hopefully get them back. Because as we discussed when they played Georgia and won, Texas was back. Texas was not back. I don't know if Texas will be back this year, but maybe one day with Sarkisian's leadership.
I have a question for you. What's one team that no one's talking about right now that you're keeping an eye on? You're not saying that they're going to do anything special, but yet you're like, this could be a fun team to watch.
Man, like I said, I got to go with Coastal Carolina. I very much enjoyed watching their season last year. The game against BYU, the last second scheduled game, was just a great football game. I don't have much, interest in Coastal Carolina, but I want to see them do well, and I think they're poised to do well. They bring their quarterback again, who just seems to be a ball player. And I'm not saying they'll make a run at the 14 playoff, but I expect them to have another successful season and possibly be in the top 10 conversation at the end of the regular season. Maybe finally get the big bowl game they're clamoring for.
I am keeping my eyes on Joey Freshwater over at Ole Miss. The Lane Train Kiffin. That defense wasn't good last season, but damn if that offense was not fun to watch.
Who would have thought old Lane Train back to making the offense?
I mean, we're just on top of talking all about former USC coaches right now. Lane Train. Let's just go ahead and bring Lane Train Sark, and let's go ahead and bring in a third one. He was a coach for a little bit. Ed Orgeron over at LSU. That's a very talented team that had a terrible year last year that is looking for a rebound. Do you think it can happen?
I think it could possibly happen. LSU has several issues right now, I guess. Not only is there some scandal surrounding the team, there's some recruiting violations from my understanding. I believe their quarterback's hurt right now.
If I'm not mistaken, you are correct.
What would be their starting quarterback is hurt. I somewhat want to see LSU have a successful season. I know for Orgeron, that was probably a really hard time to go from winning a national championship, have so much pressure on your shoulders, to having what I would describe as being a pretty abysmal season and a pretty disappointing season, especially with all that talent that they did return last year. I think this could be a rebound year. I see them being in the middle of the pack or maybe up somewhat towards the front of the pack in the SEC, given they have a hard schedule. So we will see how that plays out, and if the stars come out to shine or if they kind of just get glossed over and hidden yet again in the bottom of the pack.
And here's where I'll make my bold prediction. Ed Orgeron will not be the coach at LSU by the end of the season.
So you're saying you think he will be fired or just resign?
I think he'll be fired. Because here's the thing. He was already on the hot seat before the national championship. He was proving that he couldn't really win the big games consistently. Had a fantastic season because of the offensive talent and Joe Brady running that offense. Joe Brady leaves and he returns to the same Ed Orgeron form as before. He does the same thing this season. It's a fluke that he won a national championship. I think they're going to go ahead. LSU's a difficult place to coach to begin with. So in order to have a terrible season And then what I think is going to be an okay season will not be the standard they want to uphold at LSU, and they'll move on.
Yeah, I see something similar, or I see some parallels between Ed Orgeron and Will Muschamp, who was the coach of South Carolina before he got fired. He's on the hot seat. If he doesn't win games this season, his head is on a cutting board. I think the national championship was great. It helped extend his job a little bit, but LSU fans have not been happy with him for some time, and that did nothing but really prolong, I guess, his period of existence. So if this LSU team doesn't come out swinging this upcoming season, don't look for him to be with the team for more than probably a month and a half.
You just did some disrespectful stuff right there. I would not compare a single coach to Will Muschamp because most aren't that bad. Muschamp can run a damn good defense, but man, if you have seen his offense, it's off the field in 3 plays.
Yeah, that was probably a little bit disrespectful, but I don't apologize.
Ed Orgeron has a national championship, and Muschamp has a national championship. It's just as a defensive coordinator with Texas.
Yeah, but I think it would be interesting to watch. I think while we're speaking about SEC teams, I think South Carolina will be interesting to watch this year with new head coach Shane Beamer. I don't expect them to do that great. I think they have them ranked right above Vanderbilt in the SEC standings. So, to being that I may or may not be somewhat close to that university by proxy, it will be interesting to see how they perform. I don't expect anything spectacular. I'm kind of okay with watching them burn and flail, but we will see.
Yeah, so talking about the SEC, I mean, they've been taking up a lot of real estate in our minds recently with the expansion. Just taking you want to take Texas, you want to take Oklahoma, go ahead and get Clemson, go ahead and get FSU, go ahead and get Notre Dame, and then you can have your superpower conference that you pay your players, basically a farm league for the NFL. You are the one to go to win a national championship. I mean, I think that's terrible, and apparently college football does too, because you now have conference alliances between the ACC, the Pac-12, and the Big Ten, where they are dedicated to not becoming what the SEC is becoming and staying basically conferences that are trying to graduate student athletes, instead of just future NFL players.
Yeah, I agree. I don't like the idea of a super conference. I don't like the idea that possibly a bunch of teams could get pillaged from their conferences currently just to join the SEC because they have the biggest contracts, they have the biggest pool, probably the biggest fan base in college football. I like to see some independence, some variety, and I think at some point the magic of college football will be lost if the SEC continues to expand and grow and continue to take the best teams from every conference.
Well, I think it's going to be dangerous for Notre Dame here in a few seasons with this. With their independent status, if you have a super conference, how many teams are willing to go out of their way after playing Oklahoma, LSU, Texas, Alabama week to week to them playing Notre Dame?
Yeah, I think that will get dangerous for them from a scheduling standpoint, especially. I mean, we all know the ACC has been trying very hard to recruit Notre Dame into their football conference they already have in the ACC as far as basketball. And I think
all sports except for football and hockey.
Yeah, but yeah, it could become really, really hard for Notre Dame to schedule some quality opponents if everybody's in this super conference and they already have, quite a few top 10 matchups or very, very hard games on their schedule. Notre Dame might be kind of picking the bones to get some quality opponents.
Yeah, I mean, it could move Notre Dame away from what makes them special as a national team that travels the country to play football into just another big name local Mid-East school or Midwest school. So,
oh yeah, for sure.
It'd be interesting to see. I think that this super conference could be the death of college football as we know it, because who really wants to watch kids play NFL style football? College football had its own things that made it unique, special, which was because every other football, as I've said before, does the playoff style, does the super conferences, does the guarantee bye week if you're this. I don't want to watch the NFL. I want to watch college football. If I wanted to watch the NFL, I'd watch the Packers, I'd watch the Browns, I would watch some local teams. But why would I consistently go out of my way to watch NFL Junior? I don't watch Farm League Baseball whenever I want to watch Major League Baseball. I watch the big boys play.
Yeah, and I think especially with the Super Conference, with the prominence of NIL already, even though it's only been signed in for a couple months, that plays into the Super Conference. Given I will not get all the way into that today because I could rant for hours about it, but I think we really could be moving towards a amateur style, amateur league, G League, whatever you want to call it, of college football with the Super Conference model and someone like ESPN driving that. I think we could be in for a world of hurt if we fully move to the Super Conference model.
It could be dangerous, but who knows? Neither of us are from the future. We're only making predictions based off of our enjoyment of this type of system. I mean, I'm not even the biggest fan of the college football playoff. I prefer the BCS. I'm one of those few insane motherfuckers. So go ahead and say whatever you want about that.
Yeah, like I've said, I'm a Clemson fan, and we've greatly benefited from the college football playoff system. We've won it 2 times, been every year but its inception year, but I had no qualms with the BCS model. Number 1 versus number 2. It changed pretty much every year to some point, and even a couple years you had like some co-champions and some de facto national champions that were outside of the BCS game. So I didn't really see a reason to change, even when it moved to the 14 model, and now we're talking about 8 teams, 12 teams, 16 teams. At what point does it stop?
I mean,
I don't know.
Who can tell? I mean, once again, we're not from the future, but I mean, another dangerous precedent that we're setting is the transfer portal, because now you have kids. I know Notre Dame just had a kid. He was a last-second commitment to Notre Dame because they had lost out on a few defensive ends. He gets to Notre Dame. Within 2 months, he's transferred because he didn't think it was placed. I feel like he should have thought that decision out more, and we shouldn't be allowing kids to just jump out of their decision at the first win because they feel like it's what's best for them. I feel like you should have thought this out. Now you've made a commitment to a team and you need to write it out, at least for a season. But the transfer portal allows no questions asked, one flip, and you can go play the next season. I don't think it's all that right. I think there should be a little bit of a penalty for giving up on your team that you signed with.
Yeah, so the transfer portal today is kind of like free agency, whereas before it was changed, there was a penalty in place. It was you had to sit out a year. If you transferred, you had to sit out a year, and then you could play.
I mean,
the team.
let's just go ahead and say that one was not without fault. There were definitely faults, because I remember reading articles of kid had to transfer to be closer to his mom due to her heart surgery. NCAA denies immediate eligibility. It's like, come on, man. This kid's doing something noble, and you're saying no? I get if he just said, oh, I can't be part of the team because the coach keeps being tough on me. Yeah, that's how you get better. It's not what I thought. Okay, well, you should have thought it out. But whenever you're doing something noble for your family or for a bigger reason, I understand the NCAA saying, you know what, you have immediate eligibility.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that it was foolproof. There should have been exceptions. It should have been tweaked a little bit to where if something like that, extenuating circumstances that caused you to transfer, you should be able to play no problem. I have no issue with that whatsoever. I do have an issue with the kids who say, it's too hard for me to play here. I don't want to put in the work. Let me go somewhere else, especially now with the NIL becoming big. At what point do we have boosters offering money to a kid that's playing at one school and he goes to another school simply on the fact that he can make more money?
I mean, and let's not get this confused. I'm a fan of grad students transferring. If you feel like your final season, you've got your degree from the university you first went to, and you have an opportunity to raise like your draft stock somewhere else, you've done what you owe that team. Go earn what you want to do. Go play football at Oklahoma if you're coming from a Tulsa. Go play quarterback for Ohio State if you're coming from a Cincinnati or a Toledo, a small school, and you know you're a better talent and you could go compete to maybe put yourself and solidify yourself as a top pick in the draft. Kane Madden switching from Marshall to Notre Dame. A cornerback from, I believe, Tulsa or Tulane transferring to a Big Ten school. These guys want to have the opportunity to raise their draft stock. I feel like it's a good thing in the transfer portal on that behalf, but hell, I'm saying the transfer portal can be good. Let's just go ahead and ride this out and see how the transfer portal plays out for these kids, how it transforms college football. I mean, it's a free agency market to an extent because a kid, if he wants to go play for a certain coach, can go play for that coach now if he thinks it's best for him. It's good and it's dangerous because kids are playing college football for a free education for the most part. Not every kid's going to go to the NFL. So I think that for the kids that know they're going to graduate staying at school and not transferring is going to be a good thing. Kids that have the chance to go play in the NFL, is it okay for them to switch? You answer that question.
That's a good question. I think at some point it comes down to dedication to your team and or the opportunity to better yourself, and we'll have to see how it goes. These are young men. We always forget they're 18 to 24 years old, and they are not always the most mature, but they do have what's best for them, I guess, in their minds. And we'll just have to see how it goes. We can sit here and talk all day about the negatives, the pros. I guess we'll just have to see how it plays out.
It's easy to throw stones, and it's difficult to make that decision. So I'm not going to damn any of these kids, but as a fan of college football, I don't like the idea of having a one-time you quit on your team rule. I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah, no, and I don't like that to be promulgated in college football.
Yeah, so, I mean, I feel like it's been an interesting discussion today. We've gone over some key issues, such as the top 10, seeing how it's going to look for the preseason. We went over the transfer portal and conference affiliations and alliances. So is there anything else you want to throw in before we go ahead and check out?
No, I think that pretty much wraps it up for today. I would like to say that, like I believe I said at the beginning of the podcast, we will be making a Twitter here in a few days. Once that's up and running, we will put it on our about page of our YouTube channel, so you can follow us there. And tell us if you like our takes, if our takes are crap, if you have something that you want us to discuss within our podcast, just let us know. I will also say that you can reach us by email at overtimecfp@gmail.com, where you can also send us articles, send us fan mail, send us hate mail. I don't really care. Just send us some mail as well. Follow us on YouTube at the Overtime College Football Podcast. Like and subscribe, and let's see where we can get this thing going, man. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's been a good time talking today. Definitely go ahead and throw some topics at us. We love to debate. Heck, do whatever you want to try to spark some rage in us too. I love to try to argue about college football. I like the debate aspect of it. So this is Andrew Van thanking you guys for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe. Go ahead and hit that notification bell if you decide to, and tune in next week. Hopefully we'll have some good takes for you. And this is Andrew Van checking out.
Yeah, and this is Willie T signing out. See you.
All right, thank you for tuning in to the Overtime College Football Podcast.